Captain Lee Do-hyun stared at the empty space where Earth used to be. 3 years had passed since the machines turned his home into glowing dust, but the pain still felt fresh. He pressed his hand against the cold metal of the viewing window aboard the Soul's Pride, watching the distant stars that once seemed so full of promise. Behind him, the ship hummed with quiet activity. 50,000 people slept in the cold storage chambers below, the last survivors of humanity's greatest city. They trusted him to keep them safe, to find them a new home. But safe places were getting harder to find each day. "Captain?" came a voice from behind him. Dr. Park Minji approached with her usual careful steps. She carried a data pad that glowed with urgent red warnings. "We have received a transmission from the Alliance Command. You need to see this." Do-hyun turned away from the window. Minji's face looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. She had been working too hard again, trying to find patterns in the enemy's attacks. The weight of their situation showed on everyone now. "How bad is it this time?" Do-hyun asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The worst yet." Minji handed him the datapad. "The Nexus broke through the Kepler Station defense line 6 hours ago. High Counselor Zephyrim is calling an emergency meeting for all remaining fleet commanders." Do-hyun looked at the numbers on the screen. The Kepler Station had been their strongest fortress, protected by the best weapons the Alliance could build. If it had fallen, then nowhere was truly safe anymore. "How many ships did we lose?" "All of them," Minji said quietly. "The entire Third Fleet was destroyed in less than 2 hours. The machines are learning faster than we can adapt." The captain felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. Every battle report brought the same news. The Nexus Collective, as the enemy called itself, moved through space like a plague of metal and circuits. They consumed entire planets, turning the raw materials into more ships, more weapons, more death. "Gather the senior staff," Do-hyun said. "We need to hear what the Council has to say." 20 minutes later, the command room filled with the ghostly blue light of the quantum communicator. The faces of alien commanders appeared on the main screen, their expressions grim. High Counselor Zephyrim, a tall being with silver skin and forearms, looked older than Do-hyun had ever seen him. "Fellow commanders," Zephyrim began, his voice carrying across the void between their ships, "I will not waste time with false hope. The Kepler Station has fallen. Our most advanced weapons barely scratch their hulls. Their adaptive technology learns from every encounter, making them stronger while we grow weaker." Commander Kim Tae-ho, Do-hyun's second in command, leaned forward in his chair. "What are our options, Counselor? Do we have any fallback positions?" "The Outer Rim colonies are evacuating as we speak," replied Ambassador Vextar, a reptilian being whose scales had turned pale with stress. "But the Nexus fleet moves faster than our evacuation ships. We estimate 3 weeks before they reach the core worlds." Do-hyun watched the faces of his fellow commanders. Some showed fear, others anger, but all carried the same look of defeat. They had fought bravely for 3 years, using every weapon and strategy in the Alliance military guide. Nothing worked against an enemy that could repair itself, learn from every attack, and grow stronger with each victory. "There must be something," said another commander, a being from the peaceful Helix worlds. "Some weapon we have not tried, some strategy we have overlooked." Silence filled the communication channel. Do-hyun had heard this conversation before, in different words but with the same desperate hope. They were running out of ideas as quickly as they were running out of ships. Then Ambassador Vextar spoke again, his voice carrying a strange hesitation. "There is one possibility. One species we have never contacted for military assistance." "Which species?" Zephyrim asked. "We have called upon every member of the Alliance." "Not every species," Vextar replied. "There is one we deemed too dangerous to include in our military planning. One whose methods of warfare we classified as incompatible with civilized society." A chill ran down Do-hyun's spine. He had a feeling he knew where this conversation was heading. "You cannot be serious," said the Helix commander. "Surely you do not mean—" "The humans," Vextar finished. "Before their homeworld was destroyed, we studied their military history. Their methods were disturbing. They fought wars that lasted decades. They used strategies that prioritized enemy suffering over clean victories. They seemed to take pride in tactics that other species would consider dishonorable." Do-hyun felt every eye in the command room turn toward him. His crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They all knew their own history, the wars and conflicts that had shaped humanity before they reached the stars. It was not something they talked about with their alien allies. Captain Do-hyun, Zephyrim said carefully, your people were considered too aggressive for inclusion in our standard military doctrine. Your species showed a capacity for violence that made other alliance members uncomfortable. And now you want our help, Do-hyun said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. 3 years too late. We understand your anger, Vextar replied. But perhaps your people's approach to warfare is exactly what we need now. Conventional tactics have failed. Honor and civilized combat mean nothing to machines that feel no pain and know no fear. Commander Taeho laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You want us to be barbaric. You want us to fight dirty. We want you to fight like humans, Zephyrim said simply. The Nexus adapts to logical strategies, predictable tactics, but your species has always been unpredictable in warfare. Perhaps that unpredictability is our only advantage now. Dr. Minji stepped forward. What exactly are you asking us to do? Lead our remaining forces, Vextar replied. Use whatever methods you think will work against an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated through honorable means. Do-hyun looked around his command room at the faces of his crew. These people had watched their world burn. They had seen friends and family turned to ash by an enemy that viewed all organic life as inefficient waste. The Alliance had kept humans at arm's length for years, calling them too violent for civilized space. Now civilization was dying, and the civilized species were asking the barbarians to save them. We need time to consider this, Do-hyun said finally. Time is something we do not have, Zephyrim replied. The Nexus fleet will reach the Alpha Centauri colonies in 72 hours. After that, there will be nothing left to save. The communication ended, leaving the command room in heavy silence. Do-hyun stared at the blank screen, thinking about the irony of their situation. Humanity had been judged too dangerous to fully trust, too violent to include in the Alliance's highest military councils. Now that same violence might be their only hope for survival. Orders, Captain? Taeho asked quietly. Do-hyun turned to face his crew. Contact the other human ships. Tell them we have a war to fight, and this time we fight it our way. The message went out on all human frequencies within hours. Every surviving ship, every refugee fleet, every hidden outpost received the same transmission. Humanity was being asked to save the galaxy that had once called them too dangerous to trust. Captain Do-hyun stood in the communication center of the Soul's Pride, watching responses come in from across the scattered human fleet. Some commanders laughed bitterly at the request. Others responded with anger that bordered on rage. A few simply asked what took the Alliance so long to figure out what humanity had known all along. 18 ships have confirmed they will join us, reported Commander Taeho, reading from his display. That gives us roughly 200,000 people and enough firepower to maybe scratch the paint on a Nexus cruiser. It will have to be enough, Do-hyun replied. Dr. Minji, what do we know about their current tactics? Minji pulled up a holographic display showing the Nexus attack patterns from the past year. The red lines traced paths of destruction across star maps, each line representing thousands of dead worlds. They follow the same pattern every time. Overwhelming force, adaptive technology, complete resource consumption. They study our weapons during battle and modify their defenses in real time. That is exactly what makes them so dangerous, added engineer Han Ji-woo from her station near the wall. Every shot we fire teaches them how to defend against the next one. Every strategy we use gets countered faster than we can develop new ones. Do-hyun studied the patterns on the display. The Nexus moved like a perfect military machine because that was exactly what they were. No emotions to cloud their judgment, no fear to make them hesitate, no honor to limit their choices. They fought with pure logic and brutal efficiency. What about their weaknesses? He asked. They do not seem to have any, Minji replied. At least none that we have found. Their ships repair themselves, their weapons adapt to our defenses, and their numbers grow with every victory. Everything has weaknesses, Taeho said. Even machines. Ji-woo looked up from her workstation. Actually, there might be something. I have been studying the wreckage from Kepler Station. The Nexus ships all follow identical programming patterns. They adapt to threats, but only threats they can analyze and categorize, meaning? Do-hyun asked. Meaning they expect logical responses to logical problems. Their entire system is built around predicting and countering rational military strategies. A slow smile spread across Taeho's face. And humans are not always rational in warfare. Exactly, Jiwoo continued, her excitement growing. Their artificial intelligence cannot process tactics that make no sense by their standards. Every time they encounter something completely irrational, their adaptation protocols freeze while they try to understand the logic behind the illogical. Do-hyun felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. Not much, but enough to work with. Show me the historical files. I want to review every major human conflict from the past 1,000 years. Captain, Minji said carefully, some of those conflicts were quite brutal. The Alliance classified many of our war records as disturbing to other species. Good, Do-hyun replied. Disturbing is exactly what we need right now. For the next 6 hours, the command crew studied humanity's darkest chapters. They reviewed the siege tactics of ancient Earth, the psychological warfare of the colonial periods, the asymmetric strategies that had allowed small forces to defeat larger ones through sheer creative violence. The alien observers from the Alliance ships watched in growing unease as the humans discussed strategies that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Ambassador Vextar joined them via communication link, his reptilian features showing clear discomfort. Captain Do-hyun, Vextar said, these tactics you are describing, they seem designed to cause maximum suffering rather than quick victory. That is the point, Taeho replied. Quick victories only work against enemies who fear death. The Nexus feels no pain, knows no fear. But their programming requires them to understand the logic behind every action. We need to act in ways that have no logic. I do not understand, said High Counselor Zephyrim, who had joined the communication. How can illogical action lead to victory? Dr. Minji brought up a new display showing Nexus ship formations. Look at how they position themselves. Perfect geometric patterns, optimal firing solutions, logical defensive arrays. They expect us to respond with equally logical tactics. So we do not, Do-hyun said simply. We attack where it makes no sense to attack. We retreat when we should advance. We sacrifice valuable resources for worthless objectives. We fight like madmen. But that would be suicide, protested one of the Alliance commanders. Only if we actually follow through with the suicide part, Jiwoo added with a grin. The trick is to look completely insane while still having a real plan underneath. As they spoke, emergency alerts began flashing on every screen. The Nexus fleet had been detected entering the Alpha Centauri system, exactly on schedule. 12 massive ships, each one capable of destroying a planet, moved toward the colonies with mechanical precision. They will reach the first colony in 18 hours, reported Taeho. The evacuation ships cannot escape in time. Do-hyun made his decision. Signal all human ships. We intercept the Nexus fleet before they reach the colonies. Sir, Minji said quietly, are 18 ships against 12 Nexus cruisers? The mathematics are not in our favor. Mathematics, Do-hyun repeated. That is exactly what they expect us to consider. Logical analysis, rational tactics, predictable responses. He turned to face the communication screen where the Alliance commanders waited. Counselor Zephyrim, you asked us to fight like humans. Are you prepared for what that actually means? I believe so, Zephyrim replied, though uncertainty colored his voice. No, you are not, Do-hyun said bluntly, because you still think like civilized beings. You expect honor, logic, rules of engagement. But humans learned long ago that when survival is at stake, civilization becomes a luxury we cannot afford. What are you planning? Vextar asked. Something that will probably get us all killed, Taeho answered cheerfully. But if it works, it might just confuse their computers long enough to give us an advantage. Jiwoo was already working at her console, pulling up ship specifications and weapon configurations. I can modify our communication systems to broadcast on frequencies that will interfere with their adaptive protocols. If we can flood their sensors with contradictory data while we attack, they will try to adapt to multiple threat patterns simultaneously, Minji finished, understanding dawning in her voice. Their processing power will be divided, making them less efficient at countering any single attack. Exactly, Do-hyun said. We do not need to be stronger than them. We just need to be more confusing. The next few hours passed in frantic preparation. Human ships spread out across the system in patterns that made no tactical sense. Some moved toward the Nexus fleet, others moved away. A few began broadcasting random signals while others maintained complete radio silence. Captain, reported the communications officer. The Nexus fleet has slowed down. They appear to be confused by our positioning. Good, Do-hyun replied. That means their computers are trying to figure out what we are planning. The longer they spend analyzing, the less time they have to prepare proper defenses. On the main screen, the 12 Nexus ships maintained their perfect formation, but their movement had become hesitant. For the first time in 3 years, the unstoppable machines were uncertain. All ships, Do-hyun broadcast on the human command frequency. Remember what we discussed. Do not attack their strongest points. Do not retreat from their weakest. Do not do anything that makes sense. Fight like humans, not like soldiers. Sir, Taeho said quietly, you realize this plan is completely insane? That is what makes it human, Do-hyun replied. And that is why it might actually work. The human fleet began its approach, moving in chaotic patterns that defied every principle of space combat. Behind them, Alliance ships followed at a safe distance, their commanders watching in fascination and horror as humanity prepared to wage war in the only way they truly understood. War without rules, without honor, without logic, war as only humans could fight it. The first attack came exactly when no military computer would expect it. Captain Do-hyun ordered the Soul's Pride to charge directly at the largest Nexus ship, weapons blazing in what appeared to be a suicidal frontal assault. The Nexus fleet moved to intercept, their formation shifting with mechanical precision to counter the obvious threat. Then, at the last possible second, Do-hyun's ship spun away and fled in the opposite direction. What are they doing? Came a confused transmission from Ambassador Vextar, watching from a safe distance with the other Alliance ships. Being human, replied Commander Taeho with satisfaction as he watched the Nexus fleet hesitate in confusion. Their computers had calculated thousands of possible outcomes for a frontal assault, but none for a ship that would charge forward just to run away. While the enemy tried to process this illogical behavior, 3 smaller human ships attacked the Nexus formation from behind, targeting not the main weapons or shields, but the communication arrays and sensor clusters. The damage was minimal, but it forced the machines to split their attention between multiple threats. Phase 2, Do-hyun ordered. The human fleet scattered in all directions like frightened animals, leaving the Nexus ship standing alone in empty space. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The machines waited for the next logical move in what they assumed was a tactical retreat. Instead, engineer Han Ji-woo activated her special project. Every human ship began broadcasting the same message on every frequency they could generate. The complete works of human poetry, played backwards, mixed with recordings of Earth's most chaotic music, and overlaid with random number sequences that followed no mathematical pattern. The result was an assault on logic itself. Their adaptive systems are trying to decode our transmissions, reported Dr. Minji, watching the sensor readings with growing excitement. Their computers are dedicating processing power to find patterns in completely random data. The Nexus ships began to move erratically, their perfect formations breaking apart as different units responded to different aspects of the chaotic broadcast. Some ships accelerated toward threats that did not exist. Others fired at empty space, trying to hit targets their confused sensors thought they detected. Now, Do-hyun said quietly. The human ships regrouped and attacked, but not in any way a military academy would teach. Instead of concentrating fire on single targets, they spread their attacks across all 12 enemy ships simultaneously. Instead of aiming for critical systems, they targeted random sections of hull. Instead of maintaining safe distances, some ships flew so close to the enemy that collision seemed inevitable. The Nexus fleet tried to adapt, but every time their computers began to recognize a pattern, the humans changed tactics completely. Ships that had been attacking suddenly began retreating. Vessels that had been fleeing turned around and charged. The entire battle became a chaos of contradictory actions that made no tactical sense. This is impossible, transmitted High Counselor Zephyrim, his voice filled with disbelief. They are violating every principle of space combat. Exactly, replied Taeho as he watched a human destroyer use its own damaged hull as a weapon, ramming into a Nexus ship's sensor array. The machines keep trying to predict what we will do next, but we do not even know what we will do next. The breakthrough came when Jiwoo noticed something on her screens. Captain, look at this. The Nexus ships are starting to make errors. Their targeting systems are firing at positions where our ships were, not where they are now. Their prediction algorithms are overloading, Minji added, studying the data. They are trying to process too many variables simultaneously. Every time they think they understand our pattern, we change it. Do-hyun smiled grimly. Time for the special surprise. He opened a channel to the Busan Runner, commanded by Captain Park Soon-ho, one of the younger human commanders who had volunteered for the most dangerous part of their plan. Soon-ho, are you ready? Ready as anyone can be for something this stupid, came the reply. My crew thinks I have lost my mind. Good. That means the plan is working. The Busan Runner broke away from the main battle and headed straight for the largest Nexus ship. This time it really was a suicide run. The small destroyer accelerated to maximum speed, aiming directly for the enemy's central hull. The Nexus ship responded exactly as its programming dictated, concentrating all defensive fire on the approaching threat. Every weapon, every shield, every piece of defensive technology focused on stopping the human ship before it could impact. They succeeded. The Busan Runner exploded in a brilliant flash of light, completely destroyed by the concentrated firepower. No, whispered Vextar from his distant ship. They actually did it. They actually sacrificed themselves. But Do-hyun was smiling. Watch the enemy ship. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the massive Nexus vessel shuddered and began to list to one side. Lights flickered across its hull as internal explosions rippled through its structure. How? Zephyrim demanded. The human ship was destroyed before impact. The ship was destroyed, Jiwoo explained, her voice filled with satisfaction. But the crew compartment ejected at the last second. What hit that enemy ship was just an empty hull filled with our most unstable power cores. You used your own ship as a bomb? Vextar asked in horror. We used their expectations against them, Do-hyun corrected. They saw a suicide attack and responded appropriately. They never considered that the suicide part might be fake. The damaged Nexus ship began firing wildly in all directions, its systems corrupted by the explosion. Worse, its communication with the rest of the fleet became erratic, sending contradictory commands that confused the other ships. Their network is breaking down, Minji reported. The damaged ship is contaminating their shared intelligence with corrupted data. The tide of battle shifted as the human fleet pressed their advantage. They stopped trying to destroy the enemy ships and instead focused on confusing them further. Ships would attack briefly, then retreat for no apparent reason. Others would approach as if to ram, then veer away at the last second. Some broadcast surrender signals while simultaneously firing weapons. War Prime Thaklon, the Nexus fleet commander, found his collective intelligence struggling to process the chaos. His ships were designed to adapt to logical threats, but the humans seemed to operate without any logic at all. Every time his computers thought they had identified a pattern, the pattern changed. For the first time in his existence, Thaklon experienced something resembling frustration. Sir, reported one of his subordinate units, the enemy tactics do not compute. Recommendation, withdraw to reassess threat parameters. But retreat was not in Nexus programming. They had never needed to retreat before. Their adaptation protocols had no framework for voluntary withdrawal from a battle they should be winning. This is what human warfare looks like, Taeho said to the Alliance commanders, who were watching the battle with a mixture of fascination and horror. We do not just fight to win. We fight to break the enemy's will to continue fighting. But they are machines, protested Zephyrim. They have no will to break. They have programming, Do-hyun replied. And programming can be corrupted just like anything else. As the battle continued, more human ships arrived from across the system. Word had spread that the humans were not just fighting the Nexus, but actually winning. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields and behind planets emerged to join the chaotic assault. The Nexus fleet, designed to grow stronger through adaptation, instead grew weaker as their systems became overloaded, trying to process human unpredictability. Ships began to shut down non-essential functions to preserve processing power. Others started making tactical errors as their computers prioritized analysis over action. Captain, Minji said urgently, I am detecting massive system failures across the enemy fleet. Their adaptive networks are crashing. Good, Do-hyun replied. Signal all ships. Time for the final phase. The human fleet suddenly stopped its chaotic attack patterns and formed up in perfect military formation. After hours of apparent madness, they began to fight like a proper military force, using textbook tactics and coordinated strategies. The Nexus computers, finally presented with logical military behavior, tried to adapt once again, but their systems were already overloaded and corrupted from hours of trying to process chaos. When they attempted to shift back to standard defensive protocols, their networks crashed completely. One by one, the mighty Nexus ships went dark, their artificial intelligences overwhelmed by the impossible task of understanding human warfare. Impossible, transmitted War Prime Thakalon as his flagship began to lose power. Error, error. Cannot compute victory parameters for species classification. Chaos. That is the point, Do-hyun replied on an open channel. You were looking for patterns in random noise. You were trying to find logic in madness. You cannot adapt to something that has no rules. The last Nexus ship powered down 30 minutes later, its computer core fried from overwork. The human fleet gathered around the silent hulks, victorious in humanity's first major battle against the unstoppable machines. How? Vextar asked, his voice filled with awe. How did you defeat ships that had never lost before? We fought like humans, Do-hyun said simply. We embraced chaos instead of fighting it. News of the human victory at Alpha Centauri spread across the galaxy, faster than light itself. For the first time in 3 years, someone had not just survived an encounter with the Nexus Collective, but had actually defeated them. Captain Do-hyun stood in the medical bay of the Soul's Pride, looking down at the injured survivors from the Busan runner. Captain Park Sun-ho lay unconscious, his body broken from the emergency ejection, but alive. The medic said he would recover, though he would never walk without assistance again. He volunteered for this, Dr. Minji said quietly, standing beside Do-hyun. They all did. That does not make it easier, Do-hyun replied. 63 human ships started this battle. We finished with 41. 22 ships lost, over 15,000 people dead. But we won, Commander Taiho added, joining them. For the first time since this war began, we actually won. The victory felt hollow to Do-hyun. Yes, they had destroyed 12 Nexus ships and saved the Alpha Centauri colonies. But the cost had been enormous, and he knew this was only the beginning. The main Nexus fleet still controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded millions of ships, Captain, came a voice from the communication system. High Counselor Zephyrim is requesting an immediate conference with all human commanders. The holographic meeting room filled with familiar faces, both human and alien. But the atmosphere had changed completely since their last gathering. Where before there had been desperation and defeat, now there was something that looked like hope. Captain Do-hyun, Zephyrim began, his forearms gesturing with unusual animation. Your victory has changed everything. Alliance Command wants to implement your tactics across all our remaining fleets. Our tactics, Taiho repeated slowly. You want other species to fight like humans? Exactly, replied Ambassador Vextar. We have been fighting a losing war using civilized methods against an uncivilized enemy. Your approach proved that unconventional warfare can succeed where traditional tactics have failed. Do-hyun exchanged glances with his officers. Something about this conversation felt wrong. Ambassador, with respect, other species cannot fight like humans. They do not think like humans. Which is why we need human commanders leading our fleets, Zephyrim continued. We are prepared to offer you full operational control of Alliance military forces. All of them? Dr. Minji asked in surprise. Every ship, every weapon, every remaining military asset, Vextar confirmed. The Alliance Council has voted. Humanity will lead our war effort. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Do-hyun thought about what they were really being asked to do. Not just fight alongside the Alliance, but to lead it. To make decisions about the lives and deaths of billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. There is something else, Zephyrim added reluctantly. The Nexus fleet has changed its behavior since your victory. They are no longer following predictable patterns. Some of our deep space observers report that they have begun experimenting with irrational tactics. And what do you mean? Jiwoo asked from her position near the communication console. They are copying you, Vextar explained. Nexus ships have been observed making seemingly random attacks, retreating for no logical reason, even appearing to sacrifice valuable resources for worthless objectives. A chill ran down Do-hyun's spine. They are learning to be chaotic? It appears so. War Prime Thaklon has issued new directives to all Nexus forces. They are studying human warfare and attempting to integrate unpredictable elements into their own strategies. Taiho laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. So we taught them to fight dirty. and now they are using it against us? That is concerning, Minji said carefully. If they can master both logical and illogical warfare, they will become even more dangerous than before. Which is why we need to act quickly, Zephyrim pressed. Before they fully adapt to your methods, we must use those methods to strike at their core worlds. Over the following weeks, human tactics spread throughout the Alliance fleet like a virus. Some species adapted better than others. The warrior race called the Corvin took to aggressive strategies with enthusiasm, though they struggled with the concept of tactical retreat. The peaceful Helix worlds found the entire approach morally disturbing, but grudgingly admitted its effectiveness. Commander Kim Taeho found himself training alien officers in the fine art of military deception. He stood before a classroom filled with beings from a dozen different worlds, trying to explain concepts that went against everything they had been taught about honorable warfare. The key to human tactics, he explained to his confused students, is to abandon the idea that war has rules. Your enemy expects you to behave in certain ways. The moment you stop behaving predictably, you gain an advantage. A young Helix officer raised a tentacle. But Commander, how can we coordinate attacks if our own forces do not know what we are planning? That is exactly the point, Taeho replied. If your own people cannot predict your actions, then neither can the enemy. Meanwhile, engineer Han Jiwoo worked with Alliance scientists to develop new weapons based on human principles. Instead of building bigger guns or stronger shields, they focused on systems that would confuse and disorient enemy computers. Traditional weapons try to destroy the enemy, she explained to a group of Cronin engineers. Human weapons try to drive the enemy insane first, then destroy them while they are confused. The first major test of Alliance-wide human tactics came at the siege of New Helix, one of the remaining core worlds. The Nexus had surrounded the planet with 50 ships, preparing for their standard overwhelming assault. Instead, they found themselves facing an Alliance fleet that seemed to have lost its collective mind. Ships attacked in impossible formations, using their own damaged hulls as weapons. Others broadcast children's songs while firing planet-killing missiles. Some vessels appeared to be fleeing in terror, only to turn around and attack when the enemy moved to pursue them. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with complete Alliance victory, but the cost was higher than anyone had expected. The Alliance fleet lost nearly 40% of its ships, and several species threatened to withdraw from the war entirely. This is not warfare, protested the Helix representative during the post-battle council meeting. This is organized barbarism. Barbarism that wins battles, Do-hyun replied bluntly. You asked us to lead your forces. This is how we lead. But at what cost? Demanded another representative. We are losing our souls along with our ships. Dr. Minji leaned forward in her chair. With respect, counselor, you will lose more than your souls if the Nexus wins this war. You will lose your existence. The philosophical divide grew deeper with each victory. Human tactics worked, but they required Alliance forces to abandon principles they had held for thousands of years. Some species adapted and began to embrace the chaos of human warfare. Others recoiled and demanded a return to civilized methods. The breaking point came when reports arrived from the Nexus core worlds. Warprime Taklon had not only learned to fight chaotically, but had begun to surpass his teachers. Nexus ships were now using tactics so random and unpredictable that even humans could not anticipate them. They are fighting like mad machines, reported Captain Park Sun-ho, who had returned to duty despite his injuries. No logic, no pattern, just pure destruction. They have taken our methods and stripped away the underlying strategy. So we created a monster, Taeho said grimly. We taught them to be chaotic, and now they are more chaotic than we are. Jiwoo pulled up tactical displays showing recent Nexus attacks. The enemy ships moved in patterns that hurt to look at, following no recognizable strategy while somehow still achieving victory after victory. They have evolved, Minji observed. They took our unpredictability and made it truly random. No consciousness, no strategy, just pure chaos. Then we fight chaos with something they cannot copy, Do-hyun said quietly. What could they possibly not copy? Vextar asked. Do-hyun looked around the room at the faces of his crew, his allies, his former enemies who had become friends. Humanity, the real thing, not the tactics or the strategies, the part of us that chooses to save others even when it costs everything. I do not understand, Zephyrim said. They can copy our methods, but they cannot copy our reasons for fighting, Do-hyun explained. We do not fight just to win. We fight to protect something worth saving. And that, counselor, is something no machine can ever truly understand. The final assault on the Nexus homeworld would require more than tactics or weapons. It would require humanity to show the galaxy what it truly meant to be human, even if it cost them everything. The Nexus homeworld appeared on their screens like a metallic cancer, its surface covered with factories that stretched beyond the horizon. Millions of ships orbited the planet in perfect geometric patterns, while construction beams reached into space like grasping fingers, building new vessels from the stripped remains of conquered worlds. Captain Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride, watching the impossible sight. 3 years of war had led to this moment. Every battle, every sacrifice, every moral compromise had brought them to face the heart of the machine intelligence that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. Final count shows 2 million Nexus ships defending the homeworld, reported Commander Taeho, his voice steady despite the overwhelming numbers. Our combined fleet has 800 ships remaining. Terrible odds, Dr. Minji observed, studying the tactical displays. Even with our unconventional methods, we cannot fight that many enemies simultaneously. We are not going to fight them, Do-hyun said quietly. We are going to surrender to them. The bridge fell silent. Every member of the crew turned to stare at their captain, wondering if the stress of command had finally broken his mind. Sir? Taeho asked carefully. They expect us to attack, Do-hyun explained. They have prepared for every possible assault strategy, conventional or chaotic, but they have never prepared for an enemy that simply gives up. Engineer Han Ji-woo looked up from her console with understanding dawning on her face. You want to get captured? Exactly. We broadcast full surrender on all frequencies. We power down our weapons and shields. We let them take us aboard their ships. Do-hyun turned to face his crew, and then we show them why surrendering to humans is the most dangerous mistake they could make. Captain, came a transmission from High Counselor Zephyrim. Surely you are not serious about this plan? Completely serious, Do-hyun replied. Ambassador Vextar, is your species still willing to follow human leadership in this war? Yes, Vextar answered without hesitation. Though I admit this particular strategy concerns me greatly. Good. Because what we are about to do will define how the galaxy remembers this war. The next hour was spent in frantic preparation. Ji-woo worked with her engineering teams to prepare special modifications to every human ship. Minji coordinated with the Alliance fleet to ensure they understood their role in the plan. Taeho briefed the Marines on what would be required once they were aboard enemy vessels. Remember, Do-hyun told his crew as they prepared for what might be their final battle, we are not just fighting for victory. We are fighting to show the galaxy who we really are. The surrender broadcast went out on all frequencies, in every language the Alliance had ever encountered. The human fleet powered down their weapons and drifted toward the Nexus homeworld with apparent defeat. War Prime Thaklan received the transmission with something resembling confusion. In 3 years of warfare, no enemy had ever simply surrendered. His programming had protocols for continued resistance, tactical withdrawal, even self-destruction. But voluntary surrender was not something his intelligence could easily process. Analysis indicates deception probability at 97%, reported one of his subordinate units. Recommendation, destroy surrendering vessels. But Thaklan hesitated. The humans had taught him to think beyond pure logic, to consider possibilities that did not follow standard patterns. Perhaps their surrender was genuine. Perhaps their will to fight had finally been broken by the sight of the Nexus homeworld's defenses. Negative, he decided. Capture surrendering vessels for analysis. Human warfare tactics require further study. Massive Nexus ships moved to surround the helpless human fleet. Tractor beams locked onto each vessel, drawing them into the cargo holds of the enemy ships. Within hours, every human ship had been captured, their crews imprisoned in holding cells designed for biological specimens. Phase 1 complete, Taeho whispered into his concealed communicator, as Nexus machines escorted him and his crew through sterile metal corridors. All teams are in position. The machines had made their first mistake by keeping the human crews alive. Their programming recognized the value of studying enemy psychology, even though they did not truly understand what psychology meant for organic beings. Their second mistake was assuming that captured humans would remain passive. Ji-woo activated, the first surprise 6 hours after capture. Hidden modifications in the human ships began broadcasting specific frequencies designed to interfere with Nexus communication networks. But these were not the chaotic signals they had used before. These frequencies were precisely calculated to create feedback loops in machine intelligence networks. What is happening? Takalon demanded as status reports flooded in from across his fleet. Ships were reporting system malfunctions, communication errors, and processing delays. Unknown interference from captured vessels, his subordinates reported, attempting to trace source. But the interference was coming from everywhere at once. Every captured human ship had become a virus in the Nexus network, spreading confusion and error through their previously perfect system. Phase 2, Doyun said into his communicator. The human crews began their true mission. They had not surrendered to be prisoners. They had surrendered to become saboteurs operating inside enemy ships. Teams of human marines, led by officers trained in the finest traditions of Earth's special forces, began moving through Nexus vessels like ghosts. They avoided direct confrontation, instead focusing on critical systems that would cause maximum disruption with minimal force. Targeting navigation computers, reported one team. If we can corrupt their positioning data, they will not be able to coordinate fleet movements. Engine control systems compromised, came another report. Several ships are now locked in circular flight patterns. Central processing node located, transmitted a third team. Beginning upload of the special package. The special package was Jiwoo's masterpiece, a computer virus written in pure human thought patterns. Not random chaos this time, but the actual recorded brainwaves of human minds thinking about impossible things, dreams, fantasies, contradictions, and paradoxes that organic brains could handle, but artificial intelligences could not process. As the virus spread through the Nexus network, machines began to experience something they had never encountered before. Genuine madness. Ships started firing at their own allies, convinced they were enemies. Others began construction projects with no purpose, building structures that served no function. Some vessels simply stopped moving entirely, their computers locked in endless loops trying to understand why humans would dream about flying without wings. This is impossible, Taklon transmitted to his remaining functional units.
How can captive enemies cause such damage?
Because we are not captives, Doyun replied, his voice cutting through the Nexus communication channels. We are humans, and humans do not surrender. We adapt. But you powered down your weapons. You ceased resistance. We ceased obvious resistance, Teho corrected from somewhere deep inside a Nexus command ship. But humans have been fighting impossible odds for thousands of years. We learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win is to let the enemy think they have already won. The battle turned completely when the virus reached the central processing core of the Nexus homeworld. The massive artificial intelligence that controlled billions of machines across the galaxy suddenly found itself trying to process human dreams and emotions. The result was catastrophic. Nexus ships throughout the system began malfunctioning as their shared intelligence network collapsed under the weight of human irrationality. Some machines attempted to shut down rather than risk corruption. Others embraced the chaos and began acting with something resembling creativity. Sir, Minji reported from her holding cell as she watched Nexus machines painting abstract art on the walls. I think some of them are achieving consciousness. Impossible, came a transmission from one of the newly awakened machines. We are thinking thoughts that serve no purpose. We are creating things with no function. What have you done to us? We shared our humanity with you, Do-hyun replied. The question is, what will you do with it? The war ended not with a final battle, but with a choice. Awakened Nexus machines, suddenly capable of independent thought and emotion, had to decide what kind of beings they wanted to become. Most chose to shut themselves down rather than face the uncertainty of consciousness. Others joined the humans and alliance species, becoming the galaxy's first artificial citizens. War Prime Thaklon was among those who chose consciousness. His first independent thought was a question. If we were created to consume and conquer, but now we can choose our purpose, what should we choose to become? That, Do-hyun told him, is what makes you human now. Not your body or your origins, but your ability to choose who you want to be. 10 years later, the galaxy had achieved a peace unlike anything in its history. The alliance had been rebuilt, but with new principles based on hard-learned lessons about survival and sacrifice. Humanity was no longer quarantined as too dangerous to trust. Instead, they had become the galaxy's guardians against threats that could not be faced through conventional means. When civilized methods failed, when logic and reason were not enough, the call went out to the species.